You are watching the Deadfoot Diver Podcast with Kurt, the Deadfoot Diver.
Welcome to the Deadfoot Diver Podcast. I'm Kurt, the Deadfoot Diver, and here we are talking about everything diving, tech diving, and especially the advantages of diving and people with disabilities in diving. So I'm pleased to have today on my show the owner of SidemountPros.com and the host of the podcast Speaking Sidemount, Steve Davis. How's it going, Steve?
Going great. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Why don't we talk about how you first got into diving?
Yeah, it's a really long story, which I'll try and cut short for you. But my father took me to the beach every weekend in the summer in particular, and he's Australian, we're living in New Zealand, but it was just his thing. So from about the age of 2, 3 years old, I was thrown into the ocean and would paddle around. And I think about 4 years old, I got a set of what we called flippers back then and a plastic snorkel and mask. And it was the same time as Jacques Cousteau was on TV in the 70s. So I had this vision of myself being Albert Falco or Bernard Delamont and blasting around. So I was having all this fun as a little kid, and I remember having a snorkel kit, and I couldn't even really swim without the flippers or fins. I started to learn to swim because I was snorkeling. And then I had a stepfather later on who was a Navy diver, and he offered me the opportunity to have a little try dive with him. But I wasn't allowed to do that until I was strong enough to carry a steel 70 cubic foot cylinder 100 meters along the beach. So that ended up being 14 years old. I begged him, and then finally, 14 years old, I was big enough, strong enough to do that. So 14, I carried the cylinder down the beach, and we get into the water at Martins Bay, just a beach, and went out to 2 meters and dropped underwater. And I remember the first breaths, the first kind of feeling of going below snorkel depth and wondering whether I should take a breath and then doing it and hearing the regulator fire and deliver some gas to me. It was just such an amazing feeling. It wasn't great visibility or anything, but just being underwater was just amazing for me. Unfortunately, I didn't get to dive with him a lot from that 14-year age group, so I was still doing a lot of free diving, gathering what we call kai moana here in New Zealand, food of the sea. We would get pawa, which is like abalone. I'd do that a lot. And then when I joined the Navy, I got just a bit of time in my second year and decided I would do an open water course. So I'm 19 years old now, 1981. Oh, shit, gave my age away there, but keep that a secret sometimes. But yeah, so 19 years old, went did an open water course and just, it was a breeze for me. I just was so comfortable in the water. I felt really good. Didn't know how lucky I was. They took me out to the Poor Knights Islands, which is this beautiful marine reserve off the coast of New Zealand, and did my open water course there and fell in love with it. Yeah, was a holiday diver for a long time after that. Would just dive when I could, when I went away, or a little bit through the summer years. And then later on, as most New Zealanders do, became a hunter, a crayfish or lobster hunter. Did a lot of that. And then eventually just got a little tired of looking under rocks all the time and wanted to enjoy diving a bit more. So I started then to progress through some of the levels that we all know in recreational diving, became advanced open water. That actually mainly came about because I lost my cert card. So I needed a new cert card. I thought I might as well do another course and did the advanced open water course in Rarotonga in the Cook Islands in the Pacific. And then, yeah, then just followed the bouncing ball, did the rescue diver course and then dive master. I think that would make me a better diver. And it did, and I learned quite a lot, but it was a little bit later on then that I decided that tech diving was going to be my thing. And I don't know if you want me to go straight into that story or you want to ask me a little more, but that's where the side mount and cave diving story starts in around 2012, 13. So
Yeah, what actually got you interested into side mount diving compared to other forms of diving? Because a lot of people, I know when I started diving again this year, I first thought, because a friend of mine actually mentioned it to me, and I was like, no, I'm not doing any like serious crazy cave stuff.
sure. Yeah, it was for me. I was a dive master, and the guy who took the dive master course for me was a like a nascent tech diver himself, but very passionate about what he was getting into. And he'd just done some decompression courses previously, and he was doing some cave training, and he had discovered side mount diving. So he was the one who told me about it, Matt Shorthall, and he'd made himself his own little harness, which was pretty cool, and gave me a go with it. And so that made me jump on the internet, and YouTube was pretty new back then, but there was some YouTube video, and that's when I found the Steve Bogart's video. And Matt was a good diver, and he was a pretty good dive master, but I didn't really understand tech diving at all. And it was only when I went on the internet and found Steve Bogart's Ponderosa skills demonstration video that I saw what world-class diving looked like. And here's Steve, perfect trim, doing skills, hardly moving, super relaxed in any orientation in the side mount configuration, helmet on, lights, and it was just super, super compelling to me. So I did some more research, found Steve Martin, who at the time was starting to espouse some of the benefits of side mount diving, starting to talk about balance, trim, access to valves, lots of flexibility around how you get in and out of the water, and so on. And I thought this seems really interesting to me. And Steve was diving caves. He was actually trained, Steve Martin was actually trained by Steve Bogart. So there was a connection there as well. And so I thought, yeah, look, I'd really like the skill set. And cave diving wasn't really of great interest to me, but side mount diving was. And I think when you come to that time when you're thinking, okay, I want to dive a little deeper, I want to dive longer, and I really would like to go into overhead environments, be it shipwrecks or caves, that's when you get hit this decision of, do I want to go twin sets on my back, or do I want to go side mount? And the two Steves had just made it so compelling for me that I thought, yeah, I'm just going to go and do this side mount thing. So it wasn't really necessarily a cave diving thing. It was more a gain the skill set that they had. I wanted to be still in the water like they were. I wanted to be able to be in any orientation. I wanted to be able to swim like they did, dive like they did. It's pretty funny now. I remember talking to Patrick Woodman of ProTech in Mexico, and he said, "What you're asking there, Steve, is you want to play tennis and you want to be like Roger Federer." So I was definitely looking at world class, and but I did aspire to that, and spoke to Steve Bogarts about that afterwards. I have achieved a pretty strong level now. Yeah, am I the best in the world? No, but I'm a really solid and both instructor and side mount diver now. And after many years of practice and training and so on, and yeah, I have approached the sort of standard that those guys are achieving, and I think that was really my goal. I set out 2013 to achieve that. I didn't realize at the time how, if you go into a cave, what it does to you. So you go in through that entrance, and you just pass the sign and go into the dark zone, and all of a sudden you either love it or hate it. And for me, it was just love. I absolutely thought this is amazing. Not only the environment, not only the challenge of being there, but the planning and the skill sets and everything that you needed to do to be able to dive there was just amazing to me. And I love it to this day, both shipwreck diving and cave diving.
That's awesome. So when, as I said, I'm actually going to be doing my side mount certification in May.
Awesome.
The main reason that I started looking at it was I literally, because of the issues I have with my legs.
Hmm.
My one, I have no movement below the knee on my left one, and my right leg is pretty pinned and plated heavily as well.
Hmm.
So for me, getting into, and all the diving I did up here in the summer was all shore diving, and it's all rock.
Yep.
So I'd walk like 4 or 5 feet out in the water, usually trip
Yep.
down and then just drag myself out.
Yeah.
So I was, all these guys I was diving with, I had about like probably at least 10 guys are like, you need to seriously look at doing side mount.
Yep.
So what advantages are there for a disabled diver with side mount?
Yeah, you have to start with saying that I don't have a lot of experience working with disabled divers, so I'm joining the dots here, and maybe you can help me with that as I talk through what I think the advantages might be, and then we can look at your context and perhaps to and fro a bit on it, because I don't want to go off and claim to be some sort of disabled diver expert, but I am an expert in side mount. So let's start with that. One of the main benefits of side mount, apart from redundancy and extra gas and having two cylinders, is that you manage the two cylinders individually. So by doing that, it gives you the opportunity to have a lot of flexibility about the way that you get in and out of the water in particular. Once you're in the water, it's a bit of a push because depending on the environment, if you're diving open water in particular, having a twin set on your back in open water isn't any big deal because the water's carrying your weight. That's the great benefit. And it's the same in side mount. I would argue side mount's a little better in the water. That's an argument that you don't necessarily win. It just depends on the diver. But getting in the water is vastly different. And with a twin set, you pretty much have to put it on and walk it to the water's edge or have someone do that for you. And that might be a way, if you want to be a twin set diver, get someone else to carry it into the water, inflate the BCD, and then put it on in the water, and maybe that would be okay for you. But if you want to manage your own equipment as a disabled diver, I think then you'd have to say twin sets are out of the question because they're really heavy and it's going to cause you some issues. So the beauty of the two individual cylinders is that you can manage them one at a time. So you could get one to the water. If you're diving with a buddy, you could hand that to that person, grab the other one, walk that in, hand it to the person too, get your fins on, and then have them hand one at a time to you so that you can don them. And to be brutally honest, it's not so different for an able diver because that's exactly the way that I would do it. And the reason I would do it that way is because it's easy. Yeah, why would I want to clip these cylinders on and carry them into the water as a side mount diver when I may as well dive back mount? So I do see a lot of side mount divers doing that, walking around with their cylinders clipped onto them and so on. And look, it's okay if that's the way they want to do it, fine. But there are easier ways of managing your equipment. For cave diving or shore diving, typically we're going, you're in a cenote in a cave, for instance, you walk one cylinder down, walk back up, take the other cylinder down, jump in the water, pull one in, put it on, pull the other one, put it on. So it's super easy. But I would say, I would think as a disabled person, you're going to have a buddy no matter what. And so you work as a team. So your buddy would assist you into the water, your buddy would assist you with holding your cylinders while you get yourself set. And then as you want to put one on, you put the first one on, then they hand you the second one, and then you would maybe help them as well, hold their cylinders while they get ready, give them one and the other. And I don't see it being too much different than an able diver. The only thing I would say is if you've got waves or all of a sudden that might not be such a good day to go diving if you have disabilities because it gets commensurately harder. I don't know how that sounds to you, but that's certainly the process that I would go through.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the whole reason I'm looking at it, is to be able to get in out of the water easy, not look like a clumsy fool when I
Yeah.
do one of my face plants.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. One other thing that you might consider, depending on the duration of the dive, is you don't have to dive big cylinders. For instance, I dive 50 cubic feet, you might call them up there. There's 7 liter steel cylinders quite often.
Yep.
And the two, I work in metric, so hopefully that works, but the two 7 liter cylinders give you 14 liters of gas times 200, 2,800 liters of gas, which is more than a steel 12, more than an LE 80. And plus you've got redundancy. So now you've got lighter cylinders, which are easier to handle out of the water. They only weigh, from memory, 12 kilos, I think, each, compared to nearly 20 for a steel 12. That's another option. You could use LE40s, or they're 5.87 liters, I think, from memory. You can dive these smaller cylinders in side mount that are really easy to manage out of the water and easy in the water. Still dive side mount, still have all of the benefits, but a little smaller cylinders and a little less gas. And that might be a great solution for relatively shallow dive, less than 30 meters, for less than an hour.
I wish actually a lot of the dives I do, that would fit perfectly actually,
Yeah.
and would make it a lot easier. So when you're if you're switching tanks on side mount, how
Mhm.
difficult is it? Do you have to make a lot of adjustments to go from using one size of tank to another?
A little bit. So it depends on the method by which you attach the cylinder clip at the bottom. There is a thing called a cam band, and I don't use them, so I don't know 100%, but I'm assuming you just tighten the cam band to the size of cylinder, and that might enable you to use the same bands for large or small. I actually use sheathed Jubilee clips for my clips, and so I have small ones for my small cylinders, large ones for my large cylinders. They cost $4 each. So there's no big deal in having a set of them. So I've got them set up all of the time, sitting behind me in my dive locker here. And yeah, so they're just set up ready to go. So I've got 40 cubic foot, 50 cubic foot, so that's the 7 litre, 12 litre, and a litre, which is LE80s, all ready to go. I can grab any cylinder I want at any time and go dive it. There is a little bit of differences between the aluminium or aluminum cylinders and steels in terms of where you position the clip, and that's just to make the cylinders hold correctly. But apart from that, it's pretty much identical. And so everything else, I don't have to change my harness for it. Sometimes I'll loosen or tighten the loop bungee at the top a little bit. Steels need a little bit more tension than aluminium or aluminum do. But apart from that, it's super easy if you know how. I'll say that. I see a lot of people getting that, not wrong, but just things that could be better because they don't understand what the cylinders are doing. Aluminum are a lot more buoyant in salt water in particular, not such a big deal in fresh water. So it depends on the environment. It depends on whether you're wearing dry suit, wetsuit, how thick your undergarments are, how buoyant you're going to be. I'm a strong believer, salt water and thick undergarments in a dry suit, you pretty much want to dive steel cylinders because they add a bit of weight to your system. If you're diving freshwater, wetsuit, tropics, then aluminum are great and they have a lot of benefits. So you've got to choose your weapon, as I call it, according to your environment.
That's awesome. What about now? The other thing, when I was down diving in Jamaica recently, I ran into a couple of tech divers, and they were telling me that when they originally did their certification, that their instructor spent like literally hours and hours helping them set up their harness and stuff.
This is for side mount.
Yes.
Yeah, it shouldn't take hours and hours, but for instance, on a course with me, particularly with the X-Deep harnesses, which are very quick to set up and the harness that I favor, it takes probably less than half an hour to get a harness set up. And that's basically from out of the box, taking off a few bits and pieces that I don't like to use, and then putting it on the diver. And it is important that the fit is as close as possible to perfect out of the box. So we spend a bit of time setting that up. And then we go for a dive, and you might look at it and go, oh, yeah, I need to make an adjustment here or there. I need to bring the waist strap down. I need to tighten the shoulder strap. I need to loosen or tighten the crotch strap. I need to look at the bungees. So there'll be a bunch of things that you're looking at after that dive to iterate towards getting it better and better. But certainly, I wouldn't say hours and hours, but I would say, yeah, it's worth spending a bit of time. And what do on my courses is we'll run 3 workshops. We run an equipment workshop where we fit the harness, we set up the side mount regulator set, and we set up the cylinders with the clips. And all of those things are really important. They all work together, and then you'll put it in the water, go and do your first dives. I spend a lot of time working on donning and doffing of side mount cylinders. There's a very defined procedure that I go through, and I'm fairly strict on that only because by doing it the same way every time you build muscle memory. So then it becomes very slick and fast if you always do it the same way. If you find yourself like messing around and doing things out of order or whatever, you find that you never really develop that muscle memory, and then you're slow and ineffective. Spend a lot of time on that. We spend a bit of time on regulator switching, gas pressure checking, just the base side mount skills. A lot of time on tech diver posture, on the correct way to be in trim, manage your buoyancy and your trim and balance. And then we just go for like a heap of swimming. So it's the first day of my courses, maybe the first half day of equipment workshops and setup. And then we're in the water for a half day, 1 to 2 hour dive minimum, and maybe 2 dives if we can fit it in to just feel side mount and go around and experience what it feels like and find your trim and your balance. And we're doing weighting checks, all those sort of things in there as well. Then we're coming out of the water, debriefing before we go in the next day. And if they're stable, which is what we're looking for, you've got to be able to be stable and still in the water. Then we'll start to layer skills on top. It depends who you're learning from as well. And I do favor when you choose your instructor, find someone who either dives side mount a lot or even better dives it all the time. And because it's one of those things where if you pay it lip service, unless you're one of these divers who dives every day and dives twin set one day, side mount another, rebreather another day, then you can probably pull it off. But the vast majority of us, you really need some time to build the skills both as a diver and an instructor.
Yeah, no, that's true. I actually lucked out because I actually have an adaptive instructor
Perfect.
here I'm gonna be helping him with that, but
Yep.
he's gonna train me in Sidemount, which
Yep.
I'm really excited about because having him as an instructor opens up a lot of more doors for me as far as diving goes and stuff that I would never have thought of doing, including
Cool.
cave diving and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's the part that I'm missing, right, is this understanding of what disabled people need. And obviously you can learn that. I'm drawing lots of assumptions. Yeah, that'll be a huge benefit to you. And look, the other thing too is you got to remember when you finish your course, you're not the finished product. I say this to people. I said it on a podcast episode yesterday. Sometimes people get frustrated with how it takes time to bed in. You don't instantly necessarily become Steve Bogarts on the first day or the second day. And I promise you, there is not one great side mount or cave diver out there that was minted yesterday. It takes time for all of us. For me, I did my course in 2013, 11 years ago now, and I've dived one twin set dive and maybe half a dozen back mount single cylinder dives in the 11 years since then. So every single dive I've done, several hundred per year, has been side mount. That's the sort of effort that it takes sometimes to build a world-class skill set. Yeah.
What about now you talked about using them in open water, getting on and off a boat. How does that affect it as well? Because I'm hoping to use them a lot on dive charters up here,
Cool. Yeah, it depends
especially.
on the boat. When you look at dive boats, there's classically two types of boat. There's the rigid hull inflatables, which are fantastic for side mount because all you have to do, normally your cylinders are in a rack in front of you. You sit on one of the pontoons, you grab one, put it on the left side, put that on. That gives you gas to breathe in your BCD. Grab the other one, put that on the right side, clip it on, put that on, and now you've got your dry suit inflator and your backup or your other regulator, and you're good to go. So ribs are really easy. Charter boats, what I would recommend based on the water conditions. So obviously, if there's a lot of swell or waves or current, you can't easily do this. But I would highly recommend that you don your cylinders in the water. So you effectively get your cylinders to where the entry point is, and you can have the boat crew support you with this. Then jump in the water. Obviously, you inflate your BCD, make you come back to the boat and then have them hand you the left cylinder. You put the left cylinder on. Now you've got gas and a BCD. Then they hand you the right cylinder. You put the right cylinder on. Now you've got your dry suit and your other regulator, as I explained before, and you're good to go. And in that way, all you've got to become, it's exactly the same donning procedure. So you're not doing anything different. The only thing now is that you're floating on the surface while you do that. And the skill set there is really just to become comfortable floating without kicking around too much and just accept the cylinder. And as I said, the only thing you've really got to make sure is that you've inflated your BCD so you've got enough buoyancy when you collect the cylinder from someone. So that's would be my, and then when you come out of the water, it's just the reverse of that. You prepare your right cylinder before you get back to the boat, give the boat crew a yell, take your right cylinder off, give it to them, then take your left cylinder off, give it to them, and then you can climb out of the water, be it yourself or be it assisted. Some of the charter boats, in fact, the charter boat I dive most here has a dive lift as well. So it's got a hydraulic
Oh,
diver
really?
lift, which would be ideal for your situation as well. So if you're fortunate enough to have that, fantastic. But if not, then certainly you don't want to be getting in or out of the water with cylinders on. Now, there are times when you, you let's say now you do have some current or some swell and you've got conditions to deal with. It is possible to get to the entrance and put you just one cylinder on, and then you can get in the water with gas and BCD, and then you can either hold the other cylinder, jump in, or have that pass to you. But it does become a little bit more of a issue there if you're disabled and you've got conditions to deal with. So again, you might be choosing the particular day and say this is either a day for me or it's not a day for me based on the conditions. The other thing again, if you're using smaller cylinders, everything gets easier. One thing I would highly recommend, back to what I said before, is consider these smaller cylinders. 7 liter steels, I think, would be a great choice if there's enough gas there for you.
Yeah, that definitely I think would help for sure.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Deadfoot Diver. Subscribe and share. Your support means the world to me. If you'd like to contribute directly, you can do so at the link in the description at buymeacoffee.com/deadfootdiver. Every donation helps me work towards earning my adaptive dive buddy certification, travel costs to help me assist other adaptive divers, and covering further training and equipment costs, bringing you on even more exciting adventures. Don't forget to check out my guest links in the description. And remember, grab an adventure and live, and don't ever let a disability keep you down.
Now, you use XD for your side mount harnesses, right? Which model do you prefer out of them?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. So I started with the XD Classic, Stealth Classic back in 2013. It was all that was available at the time, and I dived all the way to open circuit Trimix on that, even though it's not ideally suited for that, and made lots of mods over the time. But as soon as they became available, I got certainly I had the first ones here in New Zealand. I got the Stealth 2.0 Tech harness, and I dived that all the way through my cave training and also through instructing in Gozo in Malta, and used it for many years. A little bit later on, I got myself a Stealth 2.0 rec, or the recreational harness. The name rec, there is a version that has plastic clips which are really easy to adjust. I don't recommend them unless you're in a shop where you want to be able to fit people really quickly. It's just a failure point there, and you don't need it. If you're disabled in the shoulders, however, there's a good point where you might want to use that. If you have trouble with your arms or shoulders or getting into the harness, then that might be a time when you might want to use those, but with the buckles. But other than that, I would avoid them. And so I use the rec mainly because I'm not a big guy. So I'm 70 kilos, 167 centimeters. So not a big guy. So firstly, I don't need the lift. And there's 19 kilos of lift in the tech. I think there's 13 in the rec. And if you weight yourself correctly, i.e., you're not overweighted, you don't need a massive amount of lift, especially diving 2 cylinders. As you dive 3 and 4, let's say you're stage cave diving, or you're doing decompression diving where you're carrying decompression cylinders, each of those will have a fair bit of gas in them, and there's a bit of gas weight until you consume that, and you might need to compensate for that. But again, 13 kilos is not a small amount of lift. So I've never had any trouble with that, and I just find the recreational version, it's just a smaller wing. The harness itself is identical. The smaller wing just wraps around me a little better and fits me better. So I tend to dive that most of the time now, but I do in my locker here have 3 or 4 tech harnesses as well that I might pull off the shelf every now and again. But yeah, typically for me, it's the rec. So if you're making that decision, tech or rec, I think that the decision can be based on your stature. If you're a big guy, grab the bigger one. If you're a little smaller, you can consider the rec. And then the other question is, how many cylinders are you carrying? If you're carrying two, you don't have a lot of gas weight to compensate. You've already got your dry suit that's compensating for changes in pressure as you go down, i.e., you're putting a little bit more gas in as you go deeper. So that volume shouldn't change too much. So it's really gas weight that you're looking at compensating for, and as you consume it. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Cool. Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting trained in side mount. It's gonna open a world of possibilities for me and make things a lot easier just getting in and out of the water for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
So, tell me about what type of training you guys offer because you do a lot of side mount training and other stuff. So, what mainly do you concentrate on?
I 100% teach side mount diving, and I'm probably an anomaly there, and it does hold me back every now and again. I'd done a lot of dives before I became an instructor, so I only became an instructor in 2015, and I taught some open water courses and enjoyed those. But I already in my mind had decided that I wanted to be a side mount diving specialist. So I trained with Tom Steiner some more, in particular on side mount instructor, and really went down that route. Since then, when I set up Side Mount Pros in late 2015, I really decided that was going to be our thing. That was going to be, we just teach side mount, we don't teach anything else. So I teach two courses. I do intro every now and again, although I prefer not to. It's like you're either going to do it or you're not. So I really teach a fundamentals side mount course, which is minimum 4 days, and We focus on the fundamentals of side mount diving. So the equipment workshops, we do the base side mount skills, and then we do what I call the side mount emergency drills. So valve drills, regulator free flows, bungee breakage, and so on. And at the end, gas sharing. And then at the end of that you should come out of that a pretty competent side mount diver, able to manage your own equipment, manage yourself in the water independently of anyone else. And then what I recommend to people is go away and find a side mount buddy or a back mount buddy for that matter, and go and do a heap of dives and just bed it all in. Practice is what it takes. And the better divers that you can dive with, it is a better thing as well. So I've always tried to dive with divers of a high standard. Not that I'm exclusive and won't dive with pretty much anyone who's a decent person and safe, but if you can find some really competent buddies to dive with, you learn a lot from doing that. Then we also offer a tech side mount course, and so that's for those people who want to go on to decompression training, or they want to go and do stage cave diving, or using stages to extend their distance and range inside a cave or overhead. And that's really learning how to manage the third and fourth cylinders. I also focus for those who are going to decompression training on decompression ascents in particular, so how to manage an ascent properly, and also a lot more on dive planning and a lot more on propulsion. So the back kick, for instance, we cover that in the fundamentals course, but it's not necessary that you absolutely master it. But on the tech course, it is important. You can't really turn up for cave training without a back kick, and it's very helpful if you're decompression diving as well to be able to back kick. Now, I don't know how that applies to you, whether you can do a one-legged one and it's again, I'm talking very much able diver there. Feel free to pull me up if I run off too far, because there's other ways to manage positioning and all that sort of things. Yeah. So that's all I do. And I'd love to teach decompression diving in particular. And if I lived in a overhead cave region, I probably would teach cave diving too, but I don't. And I just don't think there's any point. The world doesn't need another cave instructor that doesn't live in a cave region. I'm not going to be as good as the people that you're going to meet in Mexico and that sort of thing. So I think it's better if I stay in my lane and focus on side mount. And as I said, I'd love to teach deco diving, but I just don't have the time or inclination really to go through what it's going to take to do that.
I'm lucky in that aspect as well, because the guy who's training me for side mount, he actually was trained by Jill Heinert.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, so I actually had her on yesterday.
Yeah.
I might actually get to do a side mount dive with her this
Oh,
summer. So
that's going to be a real pleasure. Yeah, she's an amazing woman, obviously one of the legends of cave diving, and one of the luminaries of side mount in terms of the history of side mount too. She was around in the very not long after the very beginning of side mount diving in North America with the Woody Jaspers and Lamar Hires and Wes Skiles and all those guys as they were developing side mount as it became in Florida. And then Jill wasn't that far behind with guys like Brian K. Cook and others who continued that on. That's a real privilege. I met Jill, I interviewed her on my podcast quite a while ago. She was one of my early guests, and I got the opportunity to meet her in Mexico in 2022 while she was there filming, I think it's Into Darkness, her life story movie, which I haven't seen yet. I really want to see it, but it was a real pleasure to meet her in person as well.
yeah, she's really amazing. She actually got certified and trained about an hour and a half north of my house
Right.
originally. So she's done lots of diving up here. I know she's coming up again this summer. So we're hoping that I'm going to be able to get a dive and get some critiquing out of her,
Oh,
because she
fantastic.
actually
Yeah.
was the one that taught my instructor how to cave dive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're in very good company there. Pass on my regards when you catch up. That's absolutely awesome.
Absolutely. So now one of the other things is that you actually were, when you were in the Navy, you were the Marine engineer of the Leander class frigate HMNZS Canterbury, right? Which is now an artificial reef that you do a lot of training on.
Sure.
So tell me what that's like to dive on your old ship and be able
Uh,
to train on it.
excuse me, it's one of the pleasures of my life, to be honest. I tell people a lot, I lean back on my naval career quite a lot. A lot of my team at my coffee shop that I own now, they comment that I often reminisce, and I'm talking to people, and if an old sailor comes into the shop, we'll talk for hours. So yeah, that time of my life was very dear to me. I learned a lot. It formed some of the foundations of the person I am today. So the 14 years I had was just brilliant. Having said that, I wasn't unhappy to leave either. I think I'd don't know if I'd outgrown the Navy or there was some things there that were just, to be blunt, were pissing me off. So it's a little bit the way in the military, if you like. You're either a lifer or you're not. And I felt like I was living in a bit of a box, and there was a big world out there that I wanted to go and experience. So that was why I left. But having said that, yeah, my career, the very first ship I went on as an apprentice, young apprentice marine engineer, was Canterbury. So in 1981, and I remember the feeling of going on that ship and living in the mess deck. That we were there with 40 other guys in this little space, and we had the chefs on the other side in the same space as us. It was pretty interesting living experience, very close, and yeah, not so much that way anymore. This is very old days Navy now, but I just loved it and loved everything about it, and was good enough to become an officer. Not long after that, was promoted in 1982 and went through officer training, and then ended up doing an engineering degree at Auckland University and going to the UK for postgrad training. And then when I came back, I was posted not to Canterbury, but to Wellington, which was a sister ship, exactly the same class of Leander frigate, and so did some of my base engineer officer training there. And then after that, was posted to Canterbury as the assistant engineer. So that was my second time. Went ashore, ran the marine engineering school, and then went back for a third time as the what I call the chief engineer, but the marine engineer officer. So you're in charge of the complete propulsion plant, air conditioning, refrigeration, some of the hydraulics in terms of steering gear. But the boiler room, engine room, diesel generators, all of that was mine. Had 50 staff. 29 years
Wow.
old, would you believe, when I first went on, turned 30 on Canterbury. So a lot of responsibility, several $100 million worth of equipment was in my charge as a what I would consider now a very young man. Was the youngest ever at the time, so my career was going pretty well, and thought I was a bit of a hot shot, but it was fun time. And to be honest, the reason I left at that point too was my daughter was born and she was 18 months old, and I was about to go on a 9 month deployment. And I just didn't really want to leave my family for that amount of time. And I've always maintained I could have posted off because the ship was going on this amazing deployment to Scandinavia and Europe and so on. I could have posted off and stayed in the Navy and not gone on that trip. But I've always been one that if you can't do the job properly, then you probably shouldn't do it. So that was when I decided to leave. Some years later, so I left in 1993, and then 2007, in fact, the years before that, probably 2003 to 7, Shane Houshman and Julia Riddle at Northland Dive actually purchased the Canterbury when it was decommissioned for $1. And
Wow.
yeah, they knew what they were buying. They were actually buying several $100,000 in debt to prepare the ship to be sunk as a dive wreck. And Shane had always had this vision of sinking a wreck in the particular site that it's at, Deepwater Cove on Wanganui Bay in the Bay of Islands. It was very sheltered, the perfect place to drop a shipwreck. And he knew that. A very smart man and had some vision there. And so he and Julia and others did all the preparation to prepare the ship to be sunk. They managed the whole process of stripping it, cleaning it, getting it environmentally ready to be sunk as a dive wreck, cutting holes in it, removing some equipment, and then putting it down. And it's not easy to put a shipwreck down completely upright, and they achieved that. They got it pretty much the depth they wanted. It's slightly deeper than they wanted, but that's not a downside as far as I'm concerned. And so I was aware it was going down. Unfortunately, I was very busy working in a software company at the time, so I didn't get to see it very much or dive it or see it during that process. But I did get to dive it, not when it was sunk. I was in Germany at that time, but when I came back. And so I first dived it in January of 2008. And I wrote a book on this, the Canterbury Record Diver's Guide, on the history of the ship and what it's like to dive it, and also how to dive it. And so that was pretty cool to do. I wrote most of that book in Malta from memory. So it was quite an interesting challenge for me some 30 years after I'd actually left the Navy to write this book on how to dive it and describe the ship in detail. But I just knew it that well. It was embedded into my psyche and memory, almost every rivet on the ship. So now diving it, I've got many hundreds of dives. I haven't bothered to count, but a lot of dives on here, and I've been to nearly every compartment. I've been to some of them I haven't been to because they're just not interesting, store spaces and so on. But in particular, the machinery spaces, the boiler room, engine room, diesel generator space, refrigeration, AC spaces, and then some of the other interesting spaces, the magazine and shell room, where the 4.5-inch cartridges and shells were stored. and the steering gear compartment. There's just so many awesome spaces that you can penetrate and dive, and it has everything from dives for the beginner diver, where you can go around the superstructure, and there's a few little easy penetration spaces, the bridge and the operations room and the hangar. And then there's intermediate dives where you can, as a trained wreck diver, can go along the two-deck passage, which runs the complete length of the ship, 113 meters of passage you can swim along, but there's always exits left and right. And then as an advanced wreck diver, there's just these amazing spaces down in three, four, and five deck where you can go into the machinery spaces and others and just have brilliant dives. If anyone's interested in seeing, obviously I've got the book available through my website, sidemountpros.com, but there's also on my YouTube channel, Sidemount Pros, there's tons of video of me and others diving it. It's a spectacular wreck to dive as an artificial reef, one that wasn't sunk by other means, if you like.
Yeah, that's amazing since you especially have such a personal tie to it.
Exactly.
And by the way, all of the information links to Steve's info is going to be down in the bottom here, so you'll be able to click on it and go over and check his stuff out.
It's good.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad to have you on. This is amazing. What about now? Tell me, do you do a lot of rebreather diving?
Yeah, I do whenever I can now. So in 2018, 19, I was just before the pandemic. In fact, I was starting to get to this point in cave diving in particular, and a little bit with wreck diving. I went to Truck Lagoon and I was diving Trimix open circuit, 60, 70 meters there, and starting to feel like I was hitting the barriers of what you could do open circuit. And this was particularly driven by the cost of Trimix, which has gone through the roof. Particularly in New Zealand here, it's incredibly expensive. So I was starting, and a lot of my friends were diving rebreathers, so were diving APs, and it's abhorrent to me to put something on my back. So I just was not going to go down that path of diving a back mount rebreather. And like these guys are great divers, so take everything I'm about to say with that as the background. But they always look clumsy and overloaded and out of trim and in the water. It just doesn't do it for me at all. And even though they're doing great dives and they're good divers and everything, they need DPVs to pull them around because there's so much resistance and bulk in what they're doing, and I just didn't want to do that. So I started on Speaking Sidemount. In fact, I started on my podcast when I was interviewing guests, and Jill was one of them. I asked Jill about the Dive Soft Liberty. We would started to talk about side mount rebreathers, and there's obviously the KISS sidekick, which I spoke to Brian Cook about, and a few others. There's the Dive Soft Liberty, which a lot of people are diving and love. There's the T-Reb has come out, so I spoke to Toddy about the T-Reb. And then I started to hear about the KISS Sidewinder, first from Michael Thomas, one of the Cave Diving Group divers, when I interviewed him, and he triggered my thought process. And so then I had Ed Sorensen on, one very famous cave diver from Mariana, Florida, and I spoke to Ed, and Ed was the test diver for the KISS Sidewinder and was also one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent, instructors on the Sidewinder at the time. I just listened to what Ed had to say. I cross-referenced it with what Michael Thomas said, and I thought, yeah, that's the one for me. Without really trying it or without doing anything, I booked a course with Ed, bought a Sidewinder, flew across the planet and landed in LA, had a night overnight in LA, flew across to Panama City, landed at midnight, grabbed a car, drove in the dark through the panhandle there, which is an experience if you've never done that. It's very black and very dark there and interesting roads. And of course, no one was awake to welcome me at 3 in the morning or whenever I arrived. So I basically had to like find my way to my accommodation, fall on the floor, and then turn up at 8 o'clock the next morning ready to dive with Ed Sorensen. So it was a great experience. He's a fantastic guy, a brilliant instructor. And he and I we got on really well, and he trained me on the Sidewinder. And what an experience training with a guy like that in caves in Mariana, Florida. And then we just did some brilliant diving afterwards. Again, there's video of that on my channel. And then from that point on, I was a Sidewinder diver. So I dive it whenever I can. I have to say that I have to open circuit dive a fair bit because of teaching. And then there's just times when I do dive quite a lot on my own. And there's nothing in my mind particularly wrong with diving the Sidewinder on your own. But in New Zealand here, there's a group of the more senior divers in the country here that I hang with, and we've got a little kind of agreement between us that we won't solo dive on rebreathers. And that's fair enough. It is a more dangerous way of diving potentially, and so I don't do it out of respect for my colleagues. And as I said, I feel okay doing it myself, but yeah, we've got an agreement, so that's it. So I do dive solo quite a bit, and when I do, I dive open circuit. But if I'm cave diving, for instance, I've got at least two cave trips a year to South Australia, and I always take the Sidewinder for that. And it's an amazing tool for cave diving. As Ed Sorensen describes, it takes away all the gas stress, distance stress, time stress. If you have a problem, you've got literally hours to solve it. And yes, it can cause you problems, but if you need to bail out of the Sidewinder, you bail out to Sidemount. So you're back to your happy place. Open circuit side mount, it's exactly your open circuit setup. When you bail out, you've just got the Sidewinder on top of it. So to me, an amazing tool. Super excited at the moment. The Sidewinder 2 is very close to launching. I'm excited to cross over onto that, and that will be my tool of choice from once I get my hands on one. And yeah, I'm a real passionate side mount rebreather diver. So I'm not as keen to have a rebreather on my side, like the Liberty and the T-Reb, mainly because of the benefits I see with the Sidewinder. I just love the fact that it is my open circuit side mount setup on my side. I understand some of the benefits of the chest mounted ones as well, but I don't like having bulk on my chest either. It's not great for going through restrictions in caves, for instance. So I think the Sidewinder is my tool of choice because of the cave diving and also because of how good it is open water diving. And there's a back mount version, which I might dive just quietly. There's a back mount version of the Sidewinder too. So if I'm on a charter boat, for instance, that might be a good opportunity to try that out for no other reason than the Sidewinder is a little bit wide. So trying to fit it into a slot on a charter boat is not that easy, and I end up having to lay it on the deck or something, which isn't ideal. So yeah, love it. I think there's a lot of benefit in being a good open circuit diver before you go to rebreathers. So that's the path that I went down.
That is actually amazing that you guys, the pro guys you hang out with, have a deal that nobody dives solo with a rebreather. I've
Yeah.
never heard of anybody making that type of agreement.
No, I think it's a little bit particular. You could pull it off in other places, but it's a little bit particular to New Zealand. Yeah, we're a very small community of instructors at the higher levels here. And I'm talking guys like Pete Mesley and Andrew Simpson and Dave Pearce and a few others. And so I've just put four or five names out there. There are definitely others as well. And I don't know whether the others are in the agreement, but it was just a few phone calls and discussions around what's appropriate. Some of it was driven by the Rebreather forum that Michael Manduno runs and some of the findings from those in terms of rebreather accidents. And no one wants to see lose someone or have an accident or anything like that. Having a buddy there, who knows whether that will help you, but the bottom line is it can't hurt. So I think that that's where we're at. And as I said, I'm happy to honor that with my friends and colleagues here. But yeah, as I said, I'm not against I'm not against it per se myself. Some of my very good friends and some of my guests on Speaking Sidemount are big time solo Sidewinder divers, and that's awesome. And so it's basically specific, and yeah, a lot of it is about role modeling. A lot of it is about we're supposed to be setting an example for the other divers here. So it's not always what we do; it's what other people see us doing and then think might be okay for them. Most of the guys who I'm talking about here have a huge amount of experience as well. So, yeah, anyhow, that's just something peculiar and maybe particular to us.
Tell me about what kind of courses you got coming up in
Yeah,
the
I've got a
future.
little bit of guiding and workshopy type stuff coming up. It's our summer season here, and I own a coffee shop in a tourist area, and we're about to, from today, in fact, my team are there right now. We're about to be slammed by the summer season, which is for us fantastic. It's a really happy time, and the weather's good, and people like their coffee, and so it's a good deal for us. And we work really hard. We only get Christmas Day off, work every other day through
Wow.
the season. And that kind of finishes on the second Monday of January. Everyone goes back to work. So at that point, I have someone coming over from the UK who just reached out and wanted to dive with me. So I'm going to guide him on Canterbury. And so give him a run around the wreck and buddy him and show him a good time, hopefully. So that's happening in January. And then Probably will just do a little bit of my own diving in January, the rest of the month. And then February, I've got a student coming over from Australia for a Sidemount workshop, already trained. He wants to do a bit more, and that'll involve me taking him out and running through fundamental skills and helping him with whatever he needs. So workshops are very much depending on the student requirements. And then again, we're going to go to Canterbury and give him a really cool dive on that afterwards. So that'll be fun. And then I've just got a few students pending, so I haven't set these courses up, but I'll set some courses up in March, April. I'm also going to Australia, and we'll be teaching a side mount fundamentals course in the beautiful Kilsby sinkhole in South
Wow.
Australia there, and we'll also do a side mount workshop at the end of that before I do a week's cave diving. So that's going to be super cool. And then we're into our fall or autumn, as we call it, and winter. I imagine I'll try and set another couple of courses up. I don't run a lot of courses per year, probably 5 max, just cruise it alongside everything else I'm doing. And when I have students who are interested enough to want to pay me to teach them, then I'm there. But I do it at my own pace and as and when I want to, alongside my own diving. And of course, I've got responsibilities for the podcast Speaking Side Mount as well. So there's enough in there for me to keep me engaged and interested.
So when you are, so you only do certain amounts of training courses a year. And then how many dives do you average a year usually?
Usually between 1 and 200, so it's not massive. And I have kind of bursts where I'm doing a lot. But one of the challenges that I've personally had is I chose to live in a place called Doubtless Bay, which is absolutely beautiful. And there's a lot of people here with boats, but they all go out fishing. And if they're diving, they're hunting. And I've chosen, along with some of my colleagues, for environmental reasons, not to hunt anymore. I do fish from time to time, but not that much. I struggle to get out of my local area here, and I've recently befriended one of the local fishing charter guys, an awesome guy, and he takes me out and drops me off the back of his boat while they fish, and I go off and have a great time on my own. It's just a solo diving. And more recently, I just dived earlier in December with him, and I they were just on a pinnacle. I jumped on the pinnacle, and at 8 meters off the side of the wall, there was this kind of fish soup of this endemic species called blue mau here, and with damosels and others going around it. And I've just got this footage from the 360-degree camera of me going through this fish storm almost. It's absolutely classic. So the diving here locally to me is amazing. There is a shore dive that I teach at quite a lot, about 20 minutes away. So I'm diving more myself, and that lets me go out every week. But before that, I was able to go out with the operators who are about 1 to 2 hours south of me, and go out perhaps once a month with each of them. So that was a little bit, slower. And then I'd have bursts where I'd go overseas, either Mount Gambier or elsewhere, and you dive every day during those. So that's how it's going. So that's where the kind of 1 to 200 comes. I'd like to be much more consistent in diving every week, and I think I'm going to be able to pull that off over this year. And that would be one of my goals, I think, for the year, would be to be in the water more.
Anyhow, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Greatly appreciated. It's been awesome to have you on. I will make sure that I put all the links are down below so you can check it out. And make sure everybody that you like and subscribe and donate and check out the Deadfoot Diver podcast next week. Thanks a lot.